We start first, and I give the floor, also wish a happy birthday, to the High Representative and Vice President Kaja Kallas.
Thank you for the good wishes. So next week, leaders will meet in Hague for the NATO 2025 summit. The significance of this context cannot be overstated. We are living in very dangerous, tough times. Russia is already a direct threat to the European Union. Russia is violating our airspace, conducting provocative military maneuvers near EU borders, targeting our trains and planes, attacking our pipelines, undersea fiber optic cables, and electricity grids, is assaulting our industry, including companies supporting Ukraine, and is recruiting criminals to carry out sabotage attacks. And it is steadily building up its military forces and expanding its nuclear arsenal. Last year, Russia spent more on defense than the European Union combined. This year, Russia is spending more on defense than its own healthcare, education, and social policy combined. This is a long-term plan for a long-term aggression. You don't spend that much on military if you do not plan to use it. Those who border Russia have always felt Russia's provocations more. Those of us with the history of Soviet imperialism feel it the most. But Russia's threat to transatlantic unity and security is a problem for us all. Every European country, and indeed every NATO ally, must be thinking about defense. In 2014, NATO countries pledged to actually invest over 2% of their GDP in defense by 2024. But in 1 year, the geopolitical situation has shifted so dramatically that we are now looking at the 5% target. Europe's collective economic might is unmatched. I don't believe that there is any threat that we can't overcome if we act together and with our NATO allies. So 3 points. First, the NATO summit is first and foremost about ramping up defense spending. President von der Leyen said to this House in March that the European Union must pull every financial lever we have to do this. The national escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact provides budgetary space for member states to spend more on defense. This could mobilize up to €650 billion for defense over the next 4 years and add 1.5% of GDP to member states' defense budgets. The new Security Action for Europe instrument, SAFE as it is known, is an offer of €150 billion in loans based on few principles. They finance purchases mainly from European producers and therefore boost European defense industry in the process. The contracts are multi-annual, so industry gets the predictability it needs. And they focus on joint procurement, which will push industry to scale up quickly while prices come down. The SAFE instrument is also open to EU partners who sign security and defense partnerships. We have signed 7 of these already, including with 4 NATO allies: Norway, Albania, North Macedonia, and the United Kingdom. We hope to adopt 1 more within very short time frame with NATO ally Canada very, very soon. When NATO leaders discuss defense spending at the summit, these examples underline how the European Union directly helps 23 member states who are also NATO allies to meet their NATO targets. And a stronger European Union is also a stronger NATO. Second, on Ukraine. The European Union is doing its part here too, not least because Ukraine is Europe's first line of defense. We know that Russia responds to strength and nothing else. That is why we have just proposed the 18th sanctions package to pile on the pressure. Every sanction weakens Russia's ability to fight this war. Do not be fooled. Thanks to the EU sanctions, Russia has lost tens of billions of euros in oil revenues. Its sovereign wealth fund declined by 6 billion only last month. Sanctions work. In parallel, the European Union is the biggest provider of support to Ukraine, including over 50 billion euro in military assistance. We have to do more for Ukraine, for our own security too. To quote my friend, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, if we don't help Ukraine further, we should all start learning Russian. The stronger Ukraine is on the battlefield today, the stronger they will be around the negotiation table when Russia finally is ready to talk. And third, the importance of unity. Dear President, honourable members, Europe is under attack. And our continent sits in a world becoming more dangerous in a day. But Europe's will to act together is real. Over the past 7 decades, we have built a common market, strong European economic and unbreakable European spirit. Has it been hard? Of course it has. We have 27 democracies, and the voices in this chamber only underline how many diverse opinions there are in Europe. But what unites us, what must keep uniting us, is our goal to keep our citizens safe. This is a goal we share with every single one of our NATO allies, including the United States. I spoke at the start of Russia's threat to Europe, but Russia poses a 360-degree threat in the world. From helping shield the Assad regime, a use of chemical agents against the Syrian people, to arming and training mercenary forces from Sahel to Sudan, or using its shadow fleet to smuggle weapons to Libya in direct breach of the international arms embargo. Russia is a threat to global security. During the Cold War, the United States and its allies far outclassed the Soviet Union, and it won them the Cold War. Today, against NATO and the EU, Russia doesn't stand a chance. But we must stick together. When NATO leaders meet next week, keeping unity in the alliance is as much as a priority as spending more on defense. Dear President, honourable members, tough times require tough resolve. Europe has always shown this when it needs to, and that is the message we take to the NATO summit next week. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I now give the floor on behalf of the EPP group to Nicolas Pascual Della Parte. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, High Rep, for your introductory remarks. In the run-up to the summit, NATO summit next week, we have to ask ourselves why NATO has been the most successful defense organization ever in history. I think that out of 3 elements. First of all, because we, Europeans and Americans, we share the same principles, we share the same convictions. This is the strength of our relationship. Second, because of the strength and the ability and capability of NATO to adapt to the new realities, the flexibility of the organization. And third, the unwavering leadership of the US. That's why we have to strengthen our link with the US, and we have to recognize perhaps that we have to start the debate on the application of NATO, geographical application of NATO, because the situation, the geopolitical, geostrategic, economic situation has evolved, obviously, and most of the items are not decided only in the Atlantic, but also in the Indo-Pacific. They are interrelated, the Indo-Pacific and the Atlantic. That's why perhaps we should start thinking about extending NATO to like-minded countries around the world and to have a global NATO. Because if we are not if we are not in in the right geographical position, we will be out of business very quickly. Concerning the financing, as the High Rep has said, one of the main items of this summit will be the ramping up of the money that we have to put for our common defense. And here it's not only a matter of numbers. We have to decide first which are our main threats and risks. Second, which are the capabilities that we need to have in order to face these risks. And thirdly, not first, how much money we need to finance our capabilities. And that's why I think that we'll come to a conclusion that we have to ramp up our effort, to have a fairer burden sharing with the US, but also to identify our capabilities in the near future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pasquale Della Parte. And now for the S&D Group, Yannis Maniatis, 2 minutes.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, η επικείμενη σύνοδος του ΝΑΤΟ έρχεται σε μια στιγμή όπου...
Thank you. The NATO summit has been organized at a time at which the threat against Europe is of maximum intensity. The war in Ukraine, conflict in the Middle East, emerging revisionist regional forces, a new geopolitical map is taking form. We are not talking here about a conventional military conflict. We are faced with hybrid attacks, undermining the democratic principles underpinning our democratic states. Next week, we will have the opportunity once again to step up enhancing cooperation between the European Union and NATO within the framework of our collective defence. We must all pull together to enhance our collective defence. We should also reiterate our commitment to Article 5 of the Alliance Charter, which is the cornerstone of this alliance. We can also act, of course, independently, but this must always be in complementarity with NATO's objectives. We have enhanced security and defence in all member states, pursuant to Article 42, paragraph 7 of the treaty. We should also pursue the objective of increasing defence spending. Defence spending, however, should not come at the cost of either our welfare states or cohesion. Member states must ensure that we can construct a force which is in a position to defend our external borders, paralleled by a social and welfare state which protects the most vulnerable.
Wilimski, 1.5 minutes.
Danke sehr, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Well, you get the impression, listening to what's being said here, that you're basically in the Pentagon. You're no longer in the European Parliament. The EU was founded on the basis of peace. It's not a military alliance. And at least we've got Prime Minister Fico, who is saying that he doesn't want to invest all this money in NATO. He wants to invest it in his hospitals, schools and roads. And Hungarian Prime Minister Orban is saying a similar thing. He doesn't want to go along with this idea of constantly ramping up military expenditure and sanctions. I mean, I'm wondering what the EU is doing in a summit with NATO. Let me recall NATO's attack on Serbia, for example, 25 years ago. NATO is an interesting, to say the least, player here. Look at NATO's expansionary policy towards the east, and this is what has led to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I think the only right thing to do is to call for the European Union to go back to its original founding values. We should be calling for peace. We should be in active discussions with the different rival parties rather than constantly trying to get involved in wars. Thank you.
I give the floor now, on behalf of the ECR group, to Alexander Vondra. 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Dear friends, war is at our door. We all know it. And if we strive for peace, and I certainly do, we won't wish it into existence by nice speeches, but we must work hard for it. Trump's America may not always treat us kindly, but those are the rules of the game now, and we would better learn to play accordingly. NATO remains by far our best chance to defend ourselves. The upcoming NATO summit in Hague is an excellent opportunity to prove to our transatlantic ally that we mean it seriously. The EU is not a military project. Its fundamental aim has always been the peaceful cooperation of nations. But peace without strength is an illusion. The freedom and the prosperity hardly achieved by our forefathers will vanish in an instant if we refuse to defend it. Surely, higher defense expenditure will cost us something, but in comparison to Ukrainian wasteland, left behind by the Russian aggressive behavior, the 5% of GDP is the price we dare to pay. I see two killers of EU defense: the bogeyman of European bureaucracy and the green overall coalition that sucks our limited resources. The former must be thrown away for good. The latter must be radically reworked. This would certainly require a mental shift which we must undergo. And if we miss this opportunity, then we will lose everything.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vondra. Next is Valérie Ayé, the chair of the Renew Europe Group. 3.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. Hi, Representative De Kaya. Colleagues, we need to tell Europeans the truth. The world balance between superpowers is often dependent and not so much upon an understanding as upon fear. And a deterrent effect can form part of that. But in order to achieve a deterrent, the adversary needs to know that what's in it for them cannot amount to as much as what they stand to lose. We need peace as a guarantee of that balance of power. For decades, we have been in denial about that in Europe, and we've subcontracted it to NATO, to the US, to others. Article 5, the collective defence commitment, was always about other people. It's always someone else who's going to step in. It's never us who's going to do something. And we're now seeing the consequences of that attitude. It's come back to bite us. We haven't only underinvested in defence, we are also now facing the threat of a foreign army. That has now come to pass. We were sure that the dividend of peace would never run out. On the 24th of February 2022, we faced a decisive shock to our system. We were entirely unprepared for that. We were unprepared for providing military assistance to Ukraine, to defend ourselves, to engage in production, getting supplies out there and achieving deterrence. We need to ensure that we draw upon what NATO can offer in terms of reassurance and deterrence. There has been an unfair distribution of the burden since the alliance was founded. We now need to ensure that this is no longer a promise on paper, that this joint commitment is not about keeping Trump happy. Rather, for the sake of our own independence, for the sake of our own security, and for the sake of the security of Europeans, we need to achieve a better distribution. And it's not just about putting a figure on it. 5% is great. It's a step in the right direction. But I think we need to be crystal clear here. It's still not enough for our strategy. We need a single military market in Europe. We urgently need that. Ukraine's accession is a strategic challenge too, and we need a budget for that. 3 years on from the beginning of this conflict, we need to do a bit of soul-searching and see where we're going. What are we going to do as Europeans for our own security? My group, Renew Europe, calls for tangible action to ensure that Europe has a capacity for self-defence. The European Parliament adopted a tangible programme for the European defence industry. We call on Council to implement it without delay. In order to meet current strategic challenges, to create a single market for defence, to rationalise procurement and to ensure that European industry can progress, it is time to ensure that we go further with our discussions about deterrence and how to achieve it in Europe. We need more nuclear in France. We need to develop a European military culture, a pan-European military culture with a military academy. We want a European Security Council for that new defence matrix. No more taboos. That is the way we should go forward with NATO.
Now I give the floor to the co-chair of the Greens Group, Bas Eickhout. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, High Representative. It's very clear that the big topic in the NATO summit will be about the investment percentages in defence. And yes, Europe needs to invest much more in its own defence, and as Greens we see this necessity as well. But the real question will also be, who is going to pay? As the far right is trying to divide us, it's more important than ever that we invest together. Our current European defence system is not functioning because of our fragmented approach. Pouring more money in a non-functioning system will not do. We need a truly European approach with joint procurement and common standards. And we need a European fund for increased investments in security with joint borrowing. And ensure member states actually use the exemption from budget rules for defence. This is the only way states will not end up tearing down their healthcare, education and social security with destructive austerity measures. You can invest all you want in weapons and tanks, but Europe can only stand stable and strong if we have the support of our people. And people will support as long as we can live in freedom, with a roof above our heads and are able to pay our bills. Essential for the future of Europe is a broader concept of security and defence. Security also means energy security, societal resilience, infrastructure, innovation and cybersecurity. And the last point, make sure taxpayers' money does not just disappear into the pockets of defence industry shareholders. Let's be honest, with billions of euros coming their way, everyone can predict massive windfall profits will be made. This is why we need a European windfall profit tax on the defence industry, and these taxes must go into a European societal resilience fund so we bring the investments back to our people. Only with this broad approach to defence and security, the extra NATO percentages will deliver an EU that stands strong, stable and united on our own 2 feet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eickhout. And now, on behalf of the Left Group, Mark Potenga. 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner. Let's be honest. NATO is being led by somebody who looks very much like an international gangster. Trump has promised to invade Greenland, Panama, destroy Iran. And it wants to promote war by destroying our pensions, our welfare state, forcing us to invest 5% of GDP in war. €6,000 per family per year. That's the figure for Belgium. How many families do you know which can spend €6,000 on war every year? Ladies and gentlemen, change your message. You say that NATO is here to defend us. NATO spends 8 times more than Russia on weapons. Do we need to spend 20 times more to improve our security? Europe has got 4 times more ships than Russia, 10 times more fighter planes. Let's be honest, this money isn't to defend ourselves, it's to attack Iran today, perhaps China tomorrow. Let me say this clearly. I'm not going to sacrifice our people and our welfare state on the altar of war. This is your war.
And now, on behalf of the ESN Group, its co-chair Rene Aust. 1 minute.
Die NATO war Garant für
NATO was a guarantee of security during the Cold War. It is therefore important. The idea is to secure raw materials and securing airspace and cybersecurity. But it's because of that that we need to be honest. Europe, and Germany in particular, have relied too much on the United States. This dependence was comfortable, but it's now been used up. But what we can't have is more power coming to Brussels. We can't have an EU military bureaucracy. What we need is a strong EU within NATO, led by sovereign member states that act in a coordinated manner, not against the United States, but with the US. And we need to be brave enough to take more responsibility for ourselves. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Aust. And now we go to Michael Galler, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President, colleagues. The wake-up calls are behind us. We have woken up and we are taking necessary steps, among others, thanks to Commissioner Kubilius for the white paper and also the first omnibus on defense. To show such resolve credibly, we need a common threat assessment, and I think we have it. And I'm very grateful to you, Kaja Kallas, that you were so clear about the description, what Russia actually does. And the German, Hungarian and Slovak-speaking Putinists will not prevail, I'm quite sure about that. This summit will be crucial for our future security. We need the reassurance that all partners, including the US, abide by their treaty obligations. We are a value-based alliance, but that means also that we need to share the responsibility, and that also means the cost. We Europeans need to contribute more, and we will. I prefer to deliver better through more common planning, common procurement, making full use of the existing legal framework. We have a single market on defense since 2011. Let's finally make it a reality. We need to profit from economies of scale through such common procurement and have more effects of interoperability. If we make use of the legal framework that we have, we can also prove also to our transatlantic partner, the US, that we are helpful and supportive partners and are not only helpless as we have seen in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galler. Next is Sven Mikser, 2 minutes.
President, High Representative, hea Kaja, tähtsad asjad kõigepealt, palju õnne sünnipäevaks. Dear colleagues, let me make 3 brief points. First, about defense spending. I think it's absolutely imperative that our leaders at NATO summit agree on substantially increasing our defense spending. But when this agreement has been reached, implementation is key. I vividly remember NATO Wales summit of 2014 when agreement was reached to ramp up defense spending to 2% of GDP, and now fast forward 11 years, more or less 2/3 of the members have met that commitment. So implementation is key. Also, I think we need to avoid a situation whereby our leaders meet around the NATO table and make a pledge, and then a few weeks later they meet around EU tables and act as if they have never heard about that pledge. Let's be honest, this has happened in the past. So there needs to be a unity of effort between our two organizations. Second, I don't think that anyone of us can or could call the NATO summit a success unless a strong pledge is made to continue and indeed increase our support to Ukraine. This is the outstanding security crisis, and we must meet this challenge. And finally, I think it's imperative that NATO remains a values-based alliance, an alliance where every member state sees mutual defense of fellow democracies as their own vital national security issue, that we do not allow the alliance to morph into a purely transactional organization where security of fellow members is seen as a service to be provided for cash. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mikser. Next is Jean-Paul Garot, 2 minutes.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Le sommet de l'OTAN qui se tiendra ce mois de...
Thank you, President. The NATO summit in June is an opportunity for us to address a few points. Firstly, Ukraine. This prolonged conflict between Russia and Ukraine has led to a situation where some people are calling out for them to join NATO. Ukraine should not join NATO. The people of Ukraine have been through a lot and deserve our support, but it should be diplomatic, logistical and humanitarian support. It should not in any sense be a formal accession to NATO, because that would open the door to a direct conflict with Russia on the basis of Article 5 of NATO. All members of the alliance would then be caught up in a generalized conflict. Are we ready for that? Are we prepared for that? Are we prepared to accept the huge consequences that would have for our people? A red line. NATO cannot become an instrument for expansion up to the Russian border because of the terrifying consequences that that could have. I am more frightened of our own mistake than I am of our enemies, as Pericles said. So Ukraine cannot possibly come into that NATO family because that would be a terrible mistake for our own people. Europe needs to redefine its own position within NATO. We have always been in the shadow of the Americans, but American interests do not always align with European interests. And now that Trump is back in the White House, we're seeing this time after time. We need more strategic autonomy. We need a better balance in the contributions. We need more respect for the national security interests of each member state. Nuclear deterrence, the defense industry, and the diplomatic heritage we have should show us the way. We can no longer count on the US for peace. We need sovereign nations, lucidity rather than ideology, and we definitely need to uphold our responsibilities.
2 minutes.
Madam President, Madam High Representative, the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague will be a defining moment for the alliance credibility and Europe's security. For us, on NATO's eastern flank, we know too well that NATO is and should remain the irreplaceable shield of our freedom and our security, as well as the strongest deterrent against those who seek to undermine peace in our region. Today, we face a dramatically changed security environment, from Russia's never-ending bloodthirst in Ukraine to the escalating crisis in the Middle East and a renewed axis of autocracies. In light of this, NATO's upcoming summit must reaffirm our commitment to the founding principles of our alliance. Sovereign nations that unite to guarantee each other security in a credible manner. As such, raising defense spending, strengthening armed forces, and accelerating capability development have been urgently needed. The ECR Group fully supports upcoming talks during the summit to 5% of GDP in defense spending by 2035. Europe must share a greater responsibility for its own defense, work on a more equal footing with the US, and take part in its own deterrence. This will be a timely opportunity to engage with all involved actors and identify solutions for scaling up production, strengthening interoperability, and driving defense innovation. Last, the ECR Group will always stand with Ukraine and NATO and uphold the values that define the transatlantic alliance. Ukraine continues to fight not only for the sovereignty, but for the rules-based international order that has been protecting Europe for decades. Victory for Ukraine must remain NATO's strategic objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Dan Barna, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam High Representative. Next week in The Hague, our leaders will gather for a pivotal NATO summit shaping the future of European security in an era of unprecedented challenges. The long peace we have taken for granted was not a lucky chance. It was the product of vigilance and strength. For years, we spoke of 2% of GDP for defense as an ambition, Today, in the face of blatant aggression on our continent, it is a dangerously low baseline. We must look beyond it. Let us be clear-eyed and courageous. We must chart a realistic course towards 5% of GDP for our collective defense. This is not a matter of choice. It is the premium we must pay for the freedom and the cost of deterring those who wish us harm. This increased investment must be smart. It must be coordinated. For too long, our national defense efforts have been fragmented, leading to duplication and inefficiency. It is time to build a true, powerful and coherent European pillar within the NATO alliance. This meant joint procurement, shared capabilities and seamless interoperability. A stronger Europe makes for a stronger alliance. To achieve this, we must unleash the potential of our own defense industrial base. We must slash the suffocating bureaucracy that slows down procurement and prevent innovative, small and medium-sized enterprises from contributing. We need a regulatory environment that fosters speed, scale, and cross-border collaboration. Finally, as we build this renewed strength, we must deepen our engagement with our allies in the United States. A more self-reliant Europe is not a rival to the United States. It is the credible, capable, and reliable partner they need. Let the message from this Parliament to the summit in The Hague to be ambiguous. We are united, we are resolute, and we are ready to do what is necessary to defend our people, our values, and our peace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barnum. Next, Martins Stakis. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, our threat has one clear name, it's Russia. And that's why NATO countries have to do more than just spend. And Ukraine is leading by example with a courage, with strategy and refusals to back down. We all saw what Ukraine achieved when it reached deep into Russian territory and destroyed the very bombers that had been terrorizing its cities and people. Most of us cheered, but not all. Some here traveled to Moscow to cheer with the aggressor, and some still attend events that twist truth and excuse the war crimes. The rest understand the stakes, but one-size-fits-all defense strategy will not gonna work. It's time to focus. If one house is on fire, you don't split firefighters across the whole neighborhood. You concentrate resources where the threat is the greatest, and in this case, it's the Eastern Flank. It's not about building 1,000 tanks that stay parked in Western Europe. It's about sending 100 tanks where they are needed, where Europe's security is truly tested. To protect Europe's future, we must invest in Baltic defense line and support all frontline countries. This is smarter and cheaper than spreading resources across all countries. Defending Europe means defending the most vulnerable edge, Europe's border with Russia. That must be our shared mission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stakis. Next is Özlem Demirel. 1 minute.
Dankeschön, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President. The world's on fire. Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan. Wars and more armed conflicts. On every front, we see weapons where it's stamped made in Europe. And what do we need now? Apparently, we need even more war equipment. During the upcoming NATO summit, there will be calls and indeed a decision on spending 5% of GDP on weapons and soldiers. Doesn't sound very much, 5%. We're talking about billions. We're talking about billions and billions. And Ms. von der Leyen wants thousands or billions or trillions of euros to be spent on defence in the next coming years. In response to this, the UN says that 40 billion euros would be enough to end poverty around the world. 40 billion euros. You can't find that. No money for education, no money for healthcare, but you can always find money for weapons. Weapons and debt. Debt which upcoming generations will be expected to pay. You seem to believe that NATO is an alliance based on values. Defence and values. That's simply a fairy tale. Nobody believes that.
To Milan Urik. 1 minute.
Madam Commissioner Kallas, everybody knows that you are known for your fanatism and anti-Russian hatred. And it's absurd that you come here and demand people to spend twice as much for the weapons at the times when countries in the BRICS group are much more advanced in many areas than the EU. And you come up here now to spend twice as much as before for weapons. I certainly cannot agree with that. I'd like to know, tell us, the weapons which are supposed to be produced, against whom are we supposed to use those weapons? Well, and who is going to fight? It's certainly not going to be your sons. You would certainly find ways of how to exempt them from such service. So who is going to pay the bill? Who is going to foot the bill there? Certainly we cannot support the increase in defence spending if it is in detriment to the standard of living. Thank you.
1 minute.
Die NATO wird eine gigantische Aufrüstung.
NATO is going to be deciding a massive arms build-up. US President Trump wants to double military expenditure to 5%, of GDP. That makes a massive €3 trillion. But that no longer has anything to do with defence, and it has nothing to do with a European independent foreign and security policy. Taxpayers' money that EU heads of state and government are pumping into NATO only serves a US policy of global hegemony. While Europe is supposed to continue its proxy war against Russia on its own, the US and Israel are engaged in a war of aggression in the Middle East and want to challenge China in the Indo-Pacific. For Europe, the arms build-up means social warfare against our own people. Germany alone is supposed to work up to spending half its budget, €225 billion, for military equipment, which is actually far more than Russia is spending. This craziness is only any good for defence contractors. Every euro spent on defence will be a euro not spent on education, pensions and health. The decline of Europe is clearly coming. Thank you.
1 minute.
Thank you. I'm proud the Netherlands will host the NATO summit in Den Haag. It comes at a time when we need to commit ourselves to a growth path of the postponed 3.5% and an additional 1.5% defence spending at NATO. We cannot continue to hide ourselves behind Trump's back for our security. Without further increase of our security budget, we cannot expect ourselves to be able to defend ourselves when the EU will be attacked. And we must innovate in Rearm Europe. Use common procurement, use the Ukrainian defence industry to further support Ukraine, as well as harmonise our weaponry. And we need to create resilience among our population. We need to create a long-term commitment to our defence market and industry. But it is not only about defence, it also goes hand in hand with securing our critical raw materials, increasing competitiveness for our defence industry, and create a more sustainable and green defence supply chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I give the floor next to Eero Heinäluoma. 2 minutes.
Arvoisa puhemies.
President, Europe has learned a hard lesson about the importance of security and defence. First, Russia abandoned the OSCE documents it had signed and all its previous commitments and attacked its neighbour. Contrary to international law, Russia announced that it was annexing parts of Ukraine, an independent and sovereign neighbour. This was, of course, an attempt to repeat the pattern of the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. After that, the new US administration made it clear that its commitment to Europe is not unconditional, but conditional and relative. It is high time for Europe to grow up now. It is time to take real responsibility for our own defence. The EU countries must present a united front at the NATO summit next week, we will fulfill our defense obligation without compromise. We hope that the US will continue to be ready to cooperate and maintain its presence in Europe also in the future. European defense and support for Ukraine are in our common interest. That is why every EU country must take our defence commitment seriously. We must require all member states to meet the minimum requirements in terms of both defence and support for Ukraine. At the moment, the burden of ensuring Europe's security is very unevenly distributed. There are countries that have allocated 4% of their GDP to defence and 2% to helping Ukraine. At the same time, there are, however, countries whose defence spending barely reaches 1% and whose support for Ukraine is less than 0.1%. Now it's high time to take defence seriously. This must be our message in The Hague.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Anna Bryłka.
Dziękuję, Pani Przewodnicząca. Żyjemy w świecie olbrzymi.
Thank you, President. We are living in a world which is characterized by genuine political tension. In the immediate European neighborhood, we have war in Ukraine, war between Israel and Iran in the Middle East. The world is facing an increasing risk of worldwide conflict. The European Union says that we should use this threat to move towards greater federalization accompanied by financial mechanisms, the main beneficiary of whom will be Germany. This is a cynical ploy by President von der Leyen, who has still provided no explanation of what she did during the Pfizer affairs and now wants to pump money into European defence. My own country, Poland, is well familiar with Russian imperialism. We have decided to devote 5% of our GDP to defence. Since the Germans were buying Russian gas, we diversified energy sources. This is the only choice for Europe. Increase our arms and prepare ourselves economically for war. However, the European Union alone cannot do this because the Union is subject to all these rules on climate, energy, the economy. Defence cannot be, we can't allow the EU bureaucracy to muscle into our defence. Anything which the EU touches becomes a disaster. EU regulations have led to disaster, the complete collapse of European industry, the bankruptcy of our businesses. We have seen increasing numbers of demonstrations because of growing insecurity in our cities. The European Union should stay well away from all these policy areas. This text would lead to Germany filling its pockets with the rest of Europe's money. This is not about security. We have to cooperate with the United States and NATO. We have to allow each member state to provide for its own defence. We are against a European army. We're against common defence, and we're certainly against a return to German imperialism. And this is what we've been seeing happening in Europe for some years now. Each and every one of us should now try to spend as much on defence as Poland has been doing.
States. We cannot make any more mistakes and let dictators think that we are weak, that democracies are unable to defend themselves. We could have been on safer ground if we had mobilized all possible military assistance to Ukraine when their brave soldiers pushed the Russians out of Kharkov and Kherson 2 years ago. But then there were frightened voices of the threats of the World War III. And here we are, approaching it, because those who had to act were scared. Responsibility for the security of the continent is passing into the hands of the Europeans as never before. However, I completely disagree with the approach to Ukraine's membership in NATO. This country is already sacrificing more for NATO, for us, than many NATO members themselves. Ukraine is already acting as de facto NATO member. Ukraine is the cornerstone of European security. We are making an existential historical mistake again by allowing Russia to use a veto on NATO decisions. Let's stop spreading the Kremlin's narratives. NATO expanded because us, nations, people wanted and still want it. NATO, like you, is expanding for stable peace, not for war.
Thank you. The next speaker is Bert-Jan Reussen.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, we have demonstrated enormous naivety in Europe in recent decades. After the end of the Cold War, lots of people seemed to believe that the threat on European borders was over for good. Member states neglected defence and seemed to drift off into sleep, until Europe was suddenly shaken awake by Russia and its attack on Ukraine. Once again, NATO was recognised as the cornerstone of our defence policy, and all our focus was on NATO. So NATO never disappeared over all those years, but Europe seemed to have turned away from it. President, this growing threat requires powerful military, something my party has been calling for many years. We have to realise, however, that we need a carefully thought-out long-term strategy so as to ensure that we can build up our neglected resources. I would call on Member States to ensure that during the upcoming NATO summit we show a clear and strong commitment to enhance our defence. Defence budgets must be ramped up. But let us not have a fixation on this 5% objective. We have to opt for a strategic approach based on the NATO programme for defence planning. Member States must have a better understanding and make clear what military capacity is necessary. And then the building up of capacity must be fairly shared between the different member states. In this way, we should ensure that we have robust financial coverage via national budgets and not via European loans.
Madam Chair, dear Kaya, happy birthday and strength. Dear colleagues, clearly, the forthcoming NATO summit in The Hague will not be a mere celebratory meeting. It must address issues of collective security of the utmost importance. We must ensure the safety and unconditional security of our societies and population. Security comes at a price, but peace is priceless. Although NATO's decision in 2014 to increase defence spending at 2% is not yet fully implemented by a third of members, it is insufficient today. A new benchmark of 5% for defence spending is urgently needed in order to bolster allies' defence capabilities. NATO is a defence and security alliance that poses no threat to peaceful neighbours, but we cannot submit to Russia's provocations, such as calls for NATO forces to withdraw from the Baltic states or demands regarding Ukraine's surrender. Russia and its allies and enablers are creating security chaos and challenges. That's why we are far from all the provocations we might see. And NATO's response must be proportionate and preemptive. Clearly, NATO members in Europe must make a significant defence commitment and to do so immediately. All EU member states must be creators of security, but not only consumers. My main anticipation and call for the NATO summit in The Hague is that it will demonstrate our unity and set ambitious actions to ensure our security and deter any further provocations by Russia or its followers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sebastião Bugalho.
Madam President, Madam Commissioner, a Cimeira da NATO no final do mês revelará duas coisas. A capacidade da aliança resistir à nova realidade e
At the end of the month, the NATO summit will show to what extent we are able to use the methods which we've agreed upon and what the capacity of NATO will be. As a European and as a Portuguese citizen, although we're a long way from the conflict on European soil, we very much hope that agreements reached at the summit will be respected, because it's ever more clear that investment in defence is an urgent way to show European solidarity. We cannot have public services without defence. We need growth, but we cannot have an economy without defence. And those in border areas know that we cannot have internal security without defence. And we are now seeing hospitals that are being constructed. There are doctors who need bulletproof vests, and we need this joint procurement in order to defend ourselves.
Die nächste Rednerin ist Hanna Neumann. Bitte schön. Für Minute 30.
As we discuss next week's NATO summit, I can't help but think of the old fairy tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. A vain ruler parades around in invisible garments, and everyone nods along, too afraid to point out the obvious. Welcome to The Hague 2025. Enter Donald Trump, Emperor extraordinaire, complete with 19th century parades and self-glorifying AI videos. The summit lasts just one day, because that's his attention span. Everything carefully choreographed so he won't be bored or worse, offended. No talk of climate, gender, disinformation. Too risky. Real security threats. Too complex. Instead, capitals around the alliance are caught in a bidding war over percentages. Simple numbers may be Trump's favorite dress, but they for sure won't make us safer. And while we all tailor new imaginatory suits of statistics to flatter the emperor, hybrid attacks, military conflicts, climate risks, and authoritarian threats only grow. Yet, no one dares to lift the wheel and say, he's actually not wearing any clothes. Dear colleagues, we don't need kings, we need security. If the ruler from Washington needs to be told that he wears the best of all dresses, fine. But let's make sure that before all, we need a dress of real security for our citizens and our friends in Ukraine.
Very much. The next speaker is Merja Kyllönen.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Madam Chair, NATO and EU are in the midst of a big turmoil. It is easy to say to increase the percentage for defense, but it mustn't be done without preparation and common view of the global situation and without policy about what kind of actions we need the money for. Security is, in addition to defense readiness, also energy independence, food independence, autonomy, and also sustainable labor policy, which gives security to well-being population. NATO is a security alliance, which EU isn't, but we must not start competing for which one is more for hard military activity. It is an entirety of much larger than just defense. EU has elements that also NATO needs. For example, environmental issues, industrial policy are sectors in which EU has a lot of competence and NATO doesn't. If EU acts in a wise way, it can also strengthen NATO because we have the elements that will bring that kind of support to NATO.
Madam Secretary, dear High Representative, dear colleagues, we all know that the threat of Russia is acute and that time to prepare our defense is short. We also know that we are too weak and need to be stronger. Some people claim that investing more to our defense will ruin our welfare. That is a clear lie. NATO countries used before the end of the Cold War for decades around 4% of their GDP to defense, some even more. Germany used to have 2,500 main battle tanks plus 1,500 in reserve. Now they have less than 300. Holland had 450 tanks, now 0. But still NATO countries were able to build the base of the Western welfare system we all enjoy today. To say that we can afford to invest to our defense is a lie. We can do both defense and welfare as long as we are wise and focused on how we use our money. What we can't afford is to lose thousands of people and rebuild our societies if our deterrence fails. Russia is an aggressive imperialistic dictatorship which will threaten Europe even after Putin is gone. Now it's time to be strong, not weak. Civis pacem, bara bellum.
The next speaker is Elio Di Rupo.
Madame la Haute Représentante, High Representative, my country has a solid defence industry in both Wallonia and Flanders and is committed for a Europe with boosted defence, and we're expecting that to include increased defence budgets. But just to be clear, we want peace and not war. I think the military threat is also a moral threat, though, because if we become weaker, it's our values that are endangered as well. Freedom, equality between men and women, and the protection of minorities, for example. In this context, industrial coordination between member states is key, and I think the Commission can play a driving role in boosting this. So congratulations to you. Boosting the independence of the European Union on the military front will boost NATO rather than the opposite. But let's be clear on this. Not all member states are going to be able to dedicate 5% of their GDP to defence. That would mean, for example, in Belgium's case, €6,000 per inhabitant. There are other priorities: fighting poverty, health, purchasing power, employment, etc. And to conclude, High Representative, I don't think that 27 member states are going to move forward together on this. We need to use the example of Schengen and other examples to have a kind of coalition of the willing. Thank you.
Cari colleghi.
Colleagues, let them eat cake. Is that a new policy? I went to the supermarket yesterday. Didn't see you, Ms. Callas. Obviously, you and Ms. von der Leyen get someone else to do your shopping for you. I went to the Kiel Institute and I was looking for tanks. Found quite a nice long list. €29 million for a German one, for instance. €4 million for a Russian one. 99 Alpha. 2.3 million Chinese tank. And then I went to a different section, artillery. The German artillery, €17 million. Korean, just bought from Poland, €3 million. The Russian, €1.5 million. So if you increase military expenditure to 5% or to 3.5%, and these are the conditions in terms of what the competitiveness playing field looks like in terms of energy and military supplies, it's meaningless. This hasn't come about overnight. This is a result of the policies that the EU has followed, a social democratic Europe over the last 20 years. And you, Ms. Callas, support that. Your President and your Commission is continuing to support that. Ms. Callas, do you ever go to a supermarket? Do you ever look at prices like other European citizens do? 250 years ago, people couldn't eat cake instead of bread. Now, the same people who are being told, let them eat cake, are now being told, let them eat tanks.
Speaker is Sebastian Tinkinen.
Madam President, for decades, NATO has guaranteed peace, security and stability in our continent. However, in today's world, raising our defence spending is more critical than ever. Europe has underinvested in its defence for far too long. We can't speak of autonomy, deterrence or stronger NATO unless we are willing to pay for it. We must be ready to face it. NATO's 2% of GDP target for defence spending is no longer enough. A stronger and better equipped European defence strengthens NATO, our own continent, and the global security. The transatlantic bond needs to be unwavering, but we must take responsibility for our own defence spendings. Security is not an exception. Like anything else, it must be paid and protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Wouter Beke.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, High Representative, we could have a long debate about the NATO summit. That's important, of course, but what really matters is what we as Europeans could do. Clearly, we have to invest. We have to invest smartly, and we have to ensure that we invest in European products. That means not 17 tank systems, but a single tank system. This means greater standardization, a single strategy under a European umbrella. The European approach could enable us to save 60 billion euros through greater efficiency. That figure corresponds to the French state's defence budget at the present time. European security is our responsibility. However, we shouldn't forget that we're also talking about taxpayers' money. As a result, European security is based on European defence. The summit in The Hague, where in 1948, Winston Churchill called for a European army. That's the most efficient response, the most efficient way of guaranteeing our security. We should listen carefully to what Churchill said.
Madam Vice President, you are the person who will manage all things pertaining to the future of the EU from the military and security points of view. And ahead of the NATO summit, I would like to mention some things important for Romania. The eastern flank must be treated as a strategic priority in Europe's security architecture. Romania is in the front line between at the EU border, and we need to increase investments in infrastructure and interoperability in order to face hybrid threats, and not only. Hybrid warfare is no longer a future risk. It is present. We have been a target of such attacks, including during the election campaign that we've had lately in Romania, unfortunately so. And we have a very vulnerable point, that is the energy system. Many energy systems in the EU are fed from outside the EU, and all the data is connected and it is sent outside the EU, and all these systems are being managed by entities outside the EU. This is unacceptable for a strategic industry that is so impactful and that can have a catastrophic effect. The consolidation of defense capabilities and the need to invest in the defense industry is a necessity for Romania and for the other countries. But I would like to draw your attention on the new technologies. The EU must invest. We need top-notch defense equipment, because it is the only way to ensure our protection and to make sure that our democracy does not fail in face of threat, and our identity as European nations is not threatened. Thank you.
Der nächste Redner auf unserer Liste ist Hans Neuhoff.
Our next speaker is Hans Neuhoff.
Die EU ist im Begriff,
the EU is becoming a victim of its own propaganda. The propaganda says that after Ukraine, Russia wants to attack an EU and NATO member state. But Russia has neither the human resources nor a reason to do that. In addition, NATO has its own intelligence service chiefs, and they say that there's no evidence that Russia intends to do that. In 1993, we had the Maastricht Treaty, but in spite of that, the EU is still not a player in security. It's not taken seriously by the great powers of the world. So the idea that we can become militarily independent is absurd. It's not going to happen in the near future. We really need to ensure that we maintain NATO structures even if the US were to withdraw. The EU is now imagining things rather than sticking to the real world. We're facing an energy crisis, demographic changes, and Islamist terror. Now, these are the things that we should be looking at. We should be aware of the real threats we face, and we should be working via diplomacy. It's only thus that Europe can make a contribution to balancing powers and ensuring peace in international relations. Thank you.
Over, so the next speaker is Johan Rares Bogdan.
Eccellențele voastre,
Your Excellencies, it would be ideal to have more bread on the table and not to use sophisticated defense strategy to actually defend our bread. By the wise men and the old people of Europe cannot defend themselves, and who says that we don't need to invest in defense is either ignoring the situation or actually doing the same propaganda as Russia or China. Hitler used to allot in the 30s astronomical sums to prepare for the war, and the answer he was given was that it would be way too much for the economy of the EU states to do the same. These arguments are going to seem small if in 1 or 2 years our enemy will catch us and will actually put us in a very difficult situation. What happened in the Second World War, we all know it. We should not accept concessions when it comes to Ukraine and to the defense of Europe. We should not forget what the Western world did in 1938 when it allowed Hitler to invade parts of Europe. If Ukraine falls, Moldova, Romania, the Baltic states will be next. And then we will face a disaster for Europe.
Ondruš.
kolegyně a kolegové,
Colleagues, I am resolutely against the financing of a military development instead of schools, education and healthcare. It is not true that we can increase the military expenses without limiting social expenses. In June, we will vote on the shifting of money from the social fund and cohesion fund to support instead the defense industry. On the contrary, when we support social enterprises, this is beneficial to the entire society and not just a few multinationals. So it's unacceptable that we, by financing military equipment, finance these multinationals. Instead, we should support our working class, our people, our citizens. So why not regulate the profits of these companies? They should be signing collective agreements if they want to tax our citizens. I am warning you, this will not be economically feasible and it will not bring peace, but instead international tension.
Grappini? Mrs. Grappini, please, 30 seconds.
Just a moment.
In your speech, you said that it would be good to invest in schools, hospitals, in the social welfare, and not in the defense industry. I ask you, do you think that during wartime, under bombs, we can educate our children, we can take care of our ill? Can we increase salaries? When bombs fall from the sky, as they do in Ukraine, don't you think we should first ensure peace and quiet, stop the war, and then invest?
And the answer also 30 seconds.
paní kolegyně,
My dear colleague, we have an organization, the OSCE in Europe, and this organization in its name already has a certain number of tasks. It has to bring about security and benefit for the whole of Europe. This organization is not meant to support military equipment. I can assure you, my dear colleague, that international stability will not be achieved by military spending. Ms. Callas has said clearly, you will not increase your military spending unless you plan to use your weapon. And this is exactly what the EU is doing. We are planning military spending so that we can use it. And stability and security is ensured by diplomatic negotiations, not other means. Thank you.
Time for an answer, and I beg you please to respect that. Now the next speaker is Riho Terras.
Lugupeetav eesistuja, kõrge esindaja, head kolleegid.
President, High Representative, colleagues, the success of the NATO summit depends on whether all member states clearly understand that Russia poses an existential threat to Europe. In addition to the Russian threat, the broader security picture has become very bleak. In order to counter the threats surrounding us, all allies must contribute significantly more. A few years ago, 5% of GDP may have seemed like an unrealistic goal, but today it is a real necessity to ensure deterrence and defence. This goal must be achieved quickly. It's not enough for heads of state and government to agree to reach the 5% level by 2030. This goal must be achieved much earlier, preferably next year. Several member states bordering Russia are very close to or have already achieved the 5% level. Unfortunately, this is not enough if large and wealthy countries do not follow suit. I mean, if Estonia allocates 5.4% of its GDP to defence spending next year, then Spain and Italy, for example, must also contribute 5%, because Estonia also needs to pay pensions and teachers' salaries. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, I grew up in a Lutheran vicarage that was shaped by the peace movement. I understand the longing to live in a different time, one where we can speak about disarmament instead of deterrence. I too would sometimes prefer to live in a different time. But colleagues, we don't. The post-war leader of the SPD, Kurt Schumacher, once said that politics begins with the recognition of reality. And reality today is stark. Europe faces the most serious threat to our safety in a generation. Putin is rearming on a massive scale, and his sights are not only set on Ukraine, he wants to test NATO, break apart the EU, and erode our democracies from within. He has made that clear time and time again, and he is preparing to act not in the far distant future, but in this decade. And why? Not because he's scared of NATO. Putin actually thinks that NATO is weak, and that's actually part of the problem. But what Putin is afraid of is our way of life, because successful, free and democratic societies expose the lies that his rule is built upon. And that is why we are already subject to his hybrid warfare. Disinformation, cyber attacks, sabotage and contract killings on European soil, colleagues, that is not fiction but a grim reality, even if some in this House don't want to acknowledge it. Colleagues, the people of Europe rightly expect us to protect their safety. And that is why it is good that NATO leaders are meeting in The Hague. And it is good that we are mobilizing more resources. But let me be clear. Drones and tanks are not enough. What ultimately makes our society strong is the social cohesion they are built upon. That is what Putin fears, and that is what he targets. So let us embed our defense spending in a broader security strategy, focus on infrastructure, on resilience, and on the social fabric and solidarity that make our societies worth defending in the first place. Thank you.
The next speaker is Jaak Madison.
Ja aitäh, austatud kolleegid, hea proua Kallas, kuigi ma ei ole teie suurim fänn, siis palju sünnipäevaks.
Thank you very much. Ms. Callas, I'm no great fan of you, but happy birthday nonetheless. A series of colleagues have already spoken about there in which social services should be guaranteed. People's lives have to be made better. I agree with this. I do agree that the European Union should primarily focus on economic issues. However, that changes nothing if we're under threat. If there's a threat of war, hospitals and schools are useless. I see that in the European Union there are still states which are willing to talk about solidarity and cohesion but do nothing. It's impossible for us to cooperate effectively if some countries do nothing and the others are expected to do everything. So certain Western or Southern countries aren't enthusiastic. It's not specifically about figures, about 6 or 4%. We're talking about the need for defense technology and systems. What can we do to destroy our enemy? How much this will cost is a different issue. 5% is not great, set down in stone. We're talking about increasing our defense capabilities.
Dear colleagues, dear High Representative, whether we end up spending 3 or even 5% of our GDP on defense, the core principle must remain the same. We have to spend it on what we actually need. It's not just about more money, it's about smarter money. Due to high costs, poor coordination and low efficiency, we don't get the military capability we should for what we spend. Throwing more money at broken systems will not protect us. We must learn from the most experienced and adaptive army in the world today, the Ukrainian armed forces. They have shown how to do more with less, how to be agile, innovative and focused. Ukraine teaches us, for instance, that asymmetric drone swarms can beat all of our current weapon systems and cost only a fraction of them. This cannot be a race of national egos or parallel procurements. It must be a joint European effort, coordinated and goal-driven. Air defense, cyber resilience and battlefield readiness are not optional, but essential. And let's not forget the why. This is not a blind ramping up of military budgets. It's about securing our democratic way of life against aggressive regime that wants to see us divided and paralyzed in an ever more polarized world. Delaying action only makes the final bill higher. So yes, 5% is a big number, but the real threat is doing too little, too late. Thank you.
The next speaker is Michal Czerba.
Słowa zamieniliśmy w czyny.
Well, we have turned words into actions. Polish presidency has set a direction. We are building European defense. We are strengthening the European pillar of NATO. We spend 5% of GDP on defense, and this way Poland has set an example. We are waiting for the NATO summit with hope and confidence. We want to strengthen transatlantic relations. We want a strategy for Russia, adopted Russia as a constant threat. Russia is a country of terrorists who are responsible for war crimes. We want to support Ukraine. The EU is stronger than ever. We have the 2030 defense strategy. We have the Eastern Shield as the backbone of our defense. New money for defense, package of simplifications, the defense omnibus package. This way we can strengthen and accelerate investment in defense. So safe and secure Poland in Europe. Thank you.
Marina Mesure.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, in a few days, NATO will be carving a ridiculous objective, 5% of GDP, $100 billion per year, 1.1 billion per year for a war machine, as Trump is disengaging from the continent and showing disdain for Europe. This is a budgetary choice which will have terrible consequences. This will mean sacrifices for social expenditure, schools, hospitals, public services, but there'll be plenty of money for tanks. And with this kind of budget, you could help ensure that the Paris Agreement is respected by countries in the global south, and we could ensure that we do our best to stop climate change. The planet's on fire. But adaptation and mitigation of climate change is a security issue. Peace, independence, non-alignment, social justice, climate, all of that should be a priority, which means leaving NATO.
Sarah Knafo.
Madame la Présidente, chers collègues.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, if we were to be attacked tomorrow morning, would we be able to intersect simultaneously 200 missiles to avoid the total destruction of our cities? The answer is no. Anti-missile batteries used in Europe cover less than 10% of our territory. France, which has the best army in Europe, as we proved once again this week in the Le Bourget air show, has air defence batteries of a similar extent to Israel defending a territory which is 25 times greater. We lack tanks, drones, artillery, frigates, aircraft carriers. Above all, however, we lack lucidity when it comes to our need to defend ourselves. The most Atlantist members of you have recognised this. We can no longer depend on the United States. Trump has basically said to us, sort yourselves out. So lots of people say that we had to cut defence spending. You were wrong. Today, on the 18th of June, you no longer have an excuse in saying that. You have to recognise what we've been saying for a long time now. Let's improve our weapons purchase. Let's defend ourselves.
In the light of current events, let us say what NATO does not stand for. First, the Alliance Treaty is not about charity. The purpose of membership is to reduce security risks for members, not increase them. Accepting a new member means for each member state to accept a military commitment to defend it. If it assesses that NATO enlargement would only increase the risk of war with a third country, each member can quite legitimately veto NATO enlargement. Let us count on that. Second, NATO is a defensive alliance, not an instrument of imperialist policy. If a NATO member joins Israel's aggression against Iran and receives an appropriate military response, this is not a reason to activate Article 5. European NATO members can therefore be advised not to join the aggression, even indirectly, for example, by providing air bases since this too can be assessed as an act of war that is not defense and the consequences of which are not covered by the NATO treaty.
Thank you, President, Vice President, colleagues. NATO is and remains the central pillar of our defence here in Europe and elsewhere. We have the NATO summit coming up in The Hague, and we need to send out from that summit a signal of strength and standing together. You can't get security for free. We need to improve our defence capabilities and extend them too. When it comes to defence infrastructure, civil defence infrastructure, cybersecurity, we need to invest in all of that, and we need to ramp up our own production in Europe as well. During recent months, the European Union has done a lot, put a lot in motion. The SAFE programme, joint production and procurement, flagship projects such as an air attack shield. All of this has been done. We need a joint arms equipment market. The market is far too fragmented at the moment. We need to ensure that we keep moving forward. We have proposals on the table. We need to send out a signal of strength and cohesion from The Hague. Thank you.
Card von Frau Demirel.
There is a blue card from Mrs. Demirel. Will you accept it? No? Okay. Well, our next speaker is Tonina Pizzula then.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam High Representative, colleagues. The upcoming NATO summit is happening in a much different circumstances than a year ago. Now more than ever, we must show our commitments and responsibility for the future of this alliance. Within these commitments, we will pursue the new spending target for defence. However, defence is not only about percentages. No other global player currently faces such turmoil on almost all its borders like European Union. European Union needs to step up and join forces on a realistic approach. We cannot entrust our security every 4 years to swing voters in the United States, but establish some guidelines and initiatives to go along with these changing times. In this sense, the upcoming summit is crucial in pioneering an up-to-date and realistic EU security approach. I strongly believe we have to reiterate our commitment for international law and the rule-based international system. That means unwavering support for Ukraine. Russian aggression against Ukraine must be an integrative and not a divisive factor. The Russian Federation meddles not only in the European Union member states, but also in our immediate neighborhood, Western Balkans. NATO summit must address this issue too. In these difficult times, we also need to be focused on the NATO interest in the Arctic and the Baltics and ensure and establish in these ever important regions. Therefore, this NATO summit has crucial importance, primarily for us Europeans to define and strengthen our security in the upcoming years. It's a task and responsibility our citizens are asking us to take. Security, for sure, is a key to preserving life in democracy. Thank you.
The next speaker is Pierre-Romain Thionnet.
Dans l'histoire des alliances.
In the history of military alliances, NATO is a one-off. Originally, most of its strength came from the US, sort of forced to defend Western Europe by treaty. Some felt that the founding fathers, such as George Washington, had said that the US should not be restrained by such commitments. But since 1949, they felt that their freedom should not be undermined by an alliance. They showed solidarity, and history has proved that the case. But it is a collective defence instrument for Europe now. But what does this military instrument mean? Do we have common values? Is it basically technology alone? Alliances are about common strategic interests, which leads to a fundamental question. Do we still have the same objectives and interests as the US? Are we close allies? Who are our competitors? Who are our adversaries? Is there consultation in order to define this list? Does each NATO member have to queue up to go to the Oval Office to check that it's still in the good books? Do we imagine increasing responsibilities within the alliance? The forthcoming NATO summit will have to look at these issues. The US will also have to step up in terms of decision-taking and deciding on the direction. In strategic terms, we need to step up to the plate too.
Is Stephen Nicola Bartulica.
Zahvaljujem, kolegice I kolege.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Peace through strength must be the principle guiding our defense policy. This truth Croatia proved during its homeland war when it managed to liberate the country from the Serbian occupation. And this principle is valid still today for all of us. We can see, using the example of Ukraine, that sanction and other measures are not a deterring effect for the aggressors. So it is good that the European countries will invest more into defense. This has been called for a long time, so I welcome that. The question is, however, how this will be financed. I do not believe that the Commission will be effective in leading this effort. This should remain in the competence of national member states. It is not a good time to increase our lending.
Thank you, Madam President. Over the next few days in the NATO summit, we'll be talking about how much money we need to defend ourselves. Above all, however, we'll be talking about how we should defend ourselves. This should be primarily above the North Atlantic Alliance, which is the heart of Western civilization. So the question isn't so much how we should redirect national spending within our defense policy. In the recent past, we have seen in a similar vein to what happened in Afghanistan in 2022, we've seen the collapse of Western defense, characterized by a sense of inferiority where we've moved away from the strength of national states. Because of fear of escalation, we have, or de-escalation, sorry, we've brought about one of the worst escalation in history. The 2022 attacks in Russia and Ukraine, 2023 the terrorist attack supported by Iran against Israel, without mentioning the Chinese escalation against Taiwan. So what we're talking about today is not how we can use armies to export democracy, but let's go back to the roots of defence, which includes military defence, using all the instruments which politics give us. This is not a question of national interest, it's a question of civilization, and this is what Europe's for.
The most urgent priority at this moment is to prevent further escalation of wars and conflicts worldwide before past mistakes becomes a harsh reality once again. Both the European Union and NATO bear a responsibility to act. We have rightly supported Ukraine in its fight for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we must continue to do so to ensure its victory and bring an end to Russia's ongoing acts of aggression. Putin has repeatedly demonstrated his unwillingness to engage in genuine peace negotiations. Only way to force him is to continue strengthening Ukraine. The recent escalation in the Middle East, specifically between Israel and Iran, is yet another deeply concerning conflict. This conflict is costing innocent civilians their lives. While I hold zero sympathy for the regime in Tehran, Israel's actions are also unacceptable. Respect for international law must be upheld by all parties, as there should be no special legal privilege for war criminals and oppressors like Netanyahu, Khomeini, or anyone else.
The next speaker is Lucia Yar.
High Representatives, colleagues, even in Europe, peace has its price tag. Neglecting this reality has left us with a critical defense capabilities gap. The upcoming NATO summit is therefore a critical juncture. It's no longer about if, but precisely how fast we can increase defense expenditures to sufficient level. And it's not our thirst for militarization, colleagues, Mr. Fico, Mr. Orban. It's because of Putin. Intelligence agencies across Europe have been warning us. Russia plans to test NATO and the EU in just a few years, if you didn't hear. My country, Slovakia, remembers it very well. This coming Saturday marks 34 years since the last train carrying Soviet troops left Czechoslovakia, the true end of occupation. To me, this is a clear reminder that freedom is not given, that our democracy needs to be defended. We know exactly what's at stake when Russia threatens us with new war. So what should we do? The European Union, through the activation of the escape clause, has provided member states with the exceptional ability to raise the defense expenditures. Member states will also have the opportunity to borrow cheaply through the SAFE instrument. But let's also make sure that this money, these investments, will not end up in the hands of some defense oligarchs, and that we will be paying for things that our armies, that our security actually need. Let's act very strategically. It's for future generations. We need to think across the Union how to actually build that powerful European pillar within NATO to protect our citizens, because doing this together, it's cheaper, it unites us, and ultimately it makes us stronger. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mika Aaltola.
Madam President, Kaja Kallas, we in Europe made a fatal mistake. We started treating risk management as a foreign policy strategy, playing it safe, avoiding the necessary, defeating Russia in Ukraine. Now we face the consequences. No real mobilization, no clear plan, and the threats keep growing. When they strike, we won't manage the risks. The risks will manage us. This is a warning. This is why the EU must stop being a spectator. NATO is the backbone, yes, but we must become the muscle. Enough of symbolic solidarity. We need deterrence, strength and readiness. We must stop fearing escalation more than defeat. This summit is not about alliance, it's about building deterrence. Europe must face what is coming with clarity, with courage, and with steel in its spine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Georgios Georgiou.
Ας μιλήσουμε για το ΝΑΤΟ λοιπόν, κυρία Κάλλας. Να σας πω εγώ ποιο είναι το ΝΑΤΟ ως Κύπριος που ξέρω από πρώτο χέρι. Είναι εκείνο το οποίο προκάλεσε το...
Thank you. Well, there was a fascist coup in Cyprus in 1974, and the occupying state of Cyprus is a NATO member. NATO also supported dictatorships in the 70s in Spain, in Greece, and in Portugal. It has attacked Iraq, Yugoslavia, and Afghanistan. It caused the war in Ukraine, and now it wants to steal money from our people to fund its wars. It's a warmongering organization that feeds on blood and fear. The European Union simply follows in NATO's footsteps in a passive manner. What we want, though, is peace. But as long as NATO exists, there will be no peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam High Representative, happy birthday to you. Many years ago, when I was a Croatian diplomat in NATO, it was unthinkable that the Americans would support the European pillar within the NATO. Today, this is what is expected from the EU. Why? Because NATO will remain the backbone of the European security. However, the US is turning its eye at the Indo-Pacific as its priority. For us, the priority should be the security of the European continent. The United States will still work on the nuclear deterrence and will exchange intelligence data, but it is clear that from the European allies, it is expected to take primary responsibility for the security of their own security. So this is why we need to have the European pillar, have the strategic autonomy, not against the USA, but together with the USA, irrespective of the administration.
Thank you, Chairman, Madam High Representative. The war is raging in Ukraine, but we feel the Russian aggression in the member states. For example, the Baltic Sea in particular has become a theater of constant Russian warfare. The times are challenging, and like never before, we need a solid, strong and reliable NATO alliance which can repel any challenge. My wish for the leaders is to agree on the following main questions. First, to increase the defense spending to 5%. Second, to undertake the commitment to strengthen the eastern flank, which is the most vulnerable place in Europe. And third, to agree on constant economic and political support to Ukraine. My country, Lithuania, understands real threats from Russia and will achieve next year the 5%.
The crisis in North Korea, the war and the confrontation in Taiwan, the conflict between India and Pakistan, Iran and Israel, the Ukraine war, just a few of the 28 instability points in Europe. We need to look at the full picture of the geopolitical map of the world and to look at every region considering its specificities. We either increase our contribution to the NATO NATO budget, and regardless of the role NATO will play, we will need to adapt to the dangers and specificities of regions and member states. That is why the EU must be firm when it comes to its own defense industries, of the way member states will adapt their NATO contribution, and when it comes to the renegotiation of categorical offset clauses. Before we build a proper army of Europe, we can only rely on NATO. We must constantly improve it, and we must also increase our national capacity and our national...
Dear colleagues, without America, NATO doesn't work. NATO's commander, American. NATO's intelligence, American. NATO's weapons, American. And Trump's big betrayal of Zelensky in the White House showed us that at best, the US is unreliable. So how can we make NATO work for Europe? That depends on next week's NATO summit, which only seems to be about how much money each country will spend, a percentage. This is so short-sighted. Spending more money will not protect us. It's about how we spend it. Because if we do what we always did, we get what we always got. We need a European Supreme Allied Commander. We need a European intelligence service, and we need a European nuclear deterrent. Putin will only attack us if we are weak. A European army makes us strong. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Zeljana Zovko.
Thank you, Madam President. High Commissioner, happy birthday. It's not a nice way to spend your birthday listening to all of us here giving the speeches. 5%, it's quite realistic that we have to increase in the spending in order to seriously engage with our transatlantic partners and talk about strengthening European pillar of NATO. European Union must understand that without American security guarantee at this moment, we cannot deal in this shaky geopolitical arena. But we have to send a strong message, and I'm very happy that our leaders are agreeing on that we are thinking seriously about our defense and our defense of our citizens. And not only our borders that are unsafe. As a Croat, I know very well where the danger is coming from, and from east, south, and west. So regardless of the fact where you live, you cannot be safe if you seriously don't engage and communicate to your public that these are dangerous and challenging times, and we all have to pay for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Richard Scholes.
Dear colleagues, at The Hague, NATO must face reality. Russia is not a challenge. It is an enemy, and we must continue to call it that. It does not act alone. Iran, North Korea, and China stand behind it, forming an authoritarian axis and fueling each other's aggression. This is not regional. This is systematic. Europe must stop hiding behind US guarantees. NATO's strength must grow to meet threats in Europe and beyond. And it's time to go back to basics. If the US shifts focus, Europe must defend itself and carry its share. The proposed 5% GDP target for defense is a necessity, not because GDP ratio wins wars. They don't. Strength, capabilities, and action do. Ukraine cannot be sidelined. Its future is inseparable from NATO's security. And finally, while the NATO-Russia Council absurdly still exists, perhaps we could instead invite Putin to the following address in The Hague, to Aldevalsterweg 10, and I'm sure ICC would gladly receive him. Thank you.
The next speaker is Irene Montero.
Presidenta, señora Kallas, Israel...
President, Mrs. Kallas, Israel and the US are the greatest threat to humanity at this moment, and you are feeding the beast. Israel is illegally attacking Iran, and it's continuing to exterminate the Palestinian people. And what are you doing? Ursula von der Leyen supports Israel, saying it has a right to defend itself, when Israel is the aggressor. Mrs. Callas. The German Chancellor is thanking Israel for doing all our dirty work. And I quote, these are the so-called European values, and it's shameful. You talk about Iran's nuclear weapons being dangerous. That harks back to what happened with Iraq. But Israel has nuclear weapons. It's the only country that has, the US is the only country that has actually launched a nuclear missile. Now, at the upcoming NATO summit, we're talking about 5% of GDP being spent on the military, and we're talking about defence. But this is going to be money that should have been spent on pensions and hospitals. We're selling more weapons to Israel. Israel, because of its so-called successes, wants to sell more weapons to Europe. Mrs. Callas, you are bowing down to Trump and Israel. Thank you.
Kosh.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. NATO.
The NATO is the cornerstone of defense for Hungary and Europe, although the increase to 5% of the GDP is happening on the expense of social and healthcare spending. We can only commit ourselves if we can identify the threats we have to face. Although conventional capabilities continue to be important, hybrid threats should also be prepared for. Meanwhile, we have to strengthen the resilience of societies, the defense, industries and technologies Europe-wide. The Hungarian government's double dealing is obvious in defense. They want to spend hundreds of billions to develop the armed forces to counteract Russian threats. Meanwhile, they cherish friendly ties with Putin, and they cannot explain to Hungarians why is it so important to increase defense budgets and how they want to pay this from an ailing budget of the country. No one can, you cannot serve two masters at the same time. It seems the Hungarian government is trying to do this. But if you look at the fact that the industries, the defense industry was privatized just before the increase, it seems that the master to be served is the Hungarian oligarchs only.
Уважаеми колеги, НАТО трябваше да се разпусне веднага след края на Студената война, както стана с Варшавския договор.
Dear colleagues, just after the end of the Cold War, NATO should have been dissolved, as was the case with the Warsaw Pact. If we had done that, we wouldn't have been facing a war in Ukraine, nor indeed a risk of a Third World War. Nevertheless, rather than putting an end to its existence, NATO has turned into a vampire. To continue to live, it has to feed on the blood of others, in other words, to continue to enlarge. Because of multiple efforts designed to extend the North Atlantic Alliance, we ended up with a war in Ukraine. And the long-term durability of this vampire organization is based on manufacturing weapons. We're now told that every country should spend 5% of national wealth on defending weapons, and this will probably increase in the future. Rather than supporting education or health care, enormous sums will be devoted to buying arms. This means we'll be making ourselves poorer and poorer while increasing the risk of a world war. The more arms we give to NATO, the more the threat of a nuclear war will be hanging over us.
Zoido Alvarez.
Gracias, Presidenta. Thank you, President. Happy birthday, Ms. Callas. The NATO summit next week should constitute a turning point. As Europeans, we need to show that we've come of age now in terms of defending ourselves and showing strategic autonomy. Unfortunately, not all partners appear willing to pull their weight. In Spain, the government has said that reaching 5% of GDP will be a major mistake and that 2% is more than ample. How wrong could they be? 2% was about a different world. It was the world of 2014. Things have changed since then. We've got war on our doorstep in our eastern flank. We're seeing attacks on our critical infrastructure, underwater infrastructure, hospitals. We've had record numbers of cyber attacks, 45,000 per day in Spain alone. We cannot hide our heads in the sand. The time has come to be responsible. Speak to citizens like adults and invest in a safer Europe. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. El siguiente orador es...
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Cepeda, 1 minute and a half.
Gracias. Thank you, Vice President. I hope you're well. Madam Callas, first of all, I'd like to extend my birthday greetings to you. I hope that today's debate will hoped that my debate would be focusing more on peace than on war. The fact is, during the upcoming summit, thinking back to the Dayton, Ohio Parliamentary Assembly summit, I was very worried, in fact. I realized back then that there was a growing sensation based on a debate very similar to what we're having today, which is based on false premises. We talked about the percentage figures which each country should be spending. It seems to me what really matters for Europe is we should be thinking about a European shield, an overall strategy which the European Commission has to develop so as to ensure that we have a military structure for European defence. We can't talk about war individually as 27 member states. What we should be doing is asking what decisions the Commission is taking, what systems, what intelligence are you using to take decisions. Are you basing this on reports adopted by 27 member states? It's all very complicated. Europe needs its own model, its own army. I think that member states have to contribute more to the European budget to face up to reality, which you stepped out very clearly this morning, the very real threat which we face from Russia. This could come to pass over the next 5 years. So we've been talking a lot about the industry, businesses, or innovative ideas put forward like Commissioner Kobilius yesterday for simplification. It's quite hard to understand what he's talking about simplification. I think what we should be focusing above on all is European defence. Thank you.
The next speaker is Mrs. Steger for 1 minute.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, kommende Woche findet...
Ladies and gentlemen, well, next week there'll be this NATO summit, and once again the stage is set for defence equipment fanatics, more and more war. Politicians here in the European Parliament are calling for a defence Europe under the dominance of NATO, more and more weapons, propaganda, the propaganda of fear, saying that Europe can't defend itself when if Russia were to attack. But NATO states spend 10 times as much as Russia does on defence. It's crazy and irresponsible to think that we should ramp up defence spending so much. I mean, what's happened to peace? It's time for diplomacy now rather than more weapons. The goal here is clear. These goals in terms of defence are being abused to bring more powers to Brussels. But we in Austria are neutral and want to remain neutral. Thank you.
Okay. We are moving to the next speaker, that is Mr. Ratas for 1 minute.
Suur tänu, austatud president, head ametikaaslased, kõrge esindaja Kaja, on hea meel eesti keeles soovida sulle siin palju õnne ja jõudu.
Thank you, President. High Representative Ms. Callas. Many happy returns. Estonia has always invested a lot in defence and rearmament. Clearly, this has had an impact on our education and health sectors, but we recognise the necessity of this investment. We've now set ourselves a new objective, 5%, and I think that's the right choice. And I hope the European Parliament supports that. The US is a strategic partner for Europe, but Europe must also do its share. I believe that in this fast-moving security situation, if we are to survive, we must step up and increase our contribution. The security of Europe is at stake.
Minute.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, the upcoming NATO summit to be held in the EU is a critical juncture. We need to have our own proposals to put forward on that occasion. we cannot assume that NATO will continue to provide defence for Europe. We need to have a precise timetable. We can't end up being the victims of circumstances. We need to act now. I need to say clearly to you that Cyprus, as an EU member state, is being held hostage by Turkey. The EU has been tolerating this for years. The NATO summit should be a crucial turning point. If we want common security and defence, then we need a precise strategy. We need to act.
The next speaker is Mr. Fulksang for 1 minute.
Dear colleagues, we are not at war, but we are not living in a time of peace either. I think it's safe to say that in our lifetimes we are seeing the greatest threat that we have seen ever in Mr. Putin and his war in Ukraine, and who will be next if we do not stand together and invest in our common defense. Many countries, including my own, Denmark, have not invested sufficiently if we look at the past decades. We have let down our defense system, and we have not realized how important it is for our security that we are able to defend ourselves here in Europe and not rely on other forces. We're changing that. We are investing massively in Denmark. We're investing massively in other countries as well, but we have to realize that there are huge differences when you look at how much money that we in the European Union spend on defense, and we need to change that. So I urge you, colleagues, go to your governments, tell them to invest, tell them that we need a decision in The Hague, that we invest in our common defense. Let's do it, and let's do it now.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Eroglu for 2 minutes.
Ja, sehr geehrter Herr Vize.
Well, yes, Vice President, High Representative. Well, we're talking about the NATO summit, and this is an important discussion. I'm pleased that the European Union endlessly understands that security is important, and we also need to pay for security. I mean, the lessons from the history of humanity are that a world without security cannot exist. So it's good for us to be taking on a more important, a stronger role in NATO as the European Union. That's quite right. Now, Mrs. Kallas, you're a strong woman. Be the voice of European security. Be the voice of European defence. And that doesn't only mean saying to other European states that aren't members of the EU what they should do. We should also ensure that internally we're doing the right thing. I mean, one thing is clear. We've heard that we spend over 300 million on defence, but we're not able to defend ourselves in Europe, and we can't have that. As colleagues have said, we need to rethink our defence. We need air defence. I mean, everyone's talking about money for hospitals, education, etc. But what's the point of having hospitals if someone's going to drop a bomb on them? I mean, we need air defence. We need to prevent ourselves being attacked. It's also clear that we need to move away from heavy weapons systems. We need drones, and we also need to ensure that we can protect people's lives in Europe. Mrs. Kallas, I look forward to seeing you working for that reform in the European Union, and we will support you. We need to be strong in NATO. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Lexman for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair, Vice President. Just yesterday, we witnessed another brutal bombing of Kiev. Each such act reminds us of the threat that Russia poses and other totalitarian regimes to Ukraine, to Europe, and to world-based global order. It is high time to take our security seriously and adequately invest in defense, but we must do that responsibly and in cooperation with our allies. Raising our defense capacity is not just about tanks and missiles. Access to critical raw materials is of crucial importance for the future of the European defense. especially while totalitarian China is misusing its dominance. We must ensure that investments in critical raw materials, particularly mining, refining, and the production of essential components, are counted towards the increase of NATO defense spending. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Funchen for 1 minute.
Whilst I recognise the sovereign right of each member state to choose their own foreign policies and whether or not they participate in military alliances such as NATO, I hope each of you too recognise the sovereign right of my country, Ireland, to maintain its historical policy of neutrality. We in Ireland have a proud history and tradition of UN peacekeeping, and long may that continue. Now, make no mistake, we do require investment in order to ensure the men and women of the Irish Defence Forces are properly paid and are properly equipped. But this cannot be used as an excuse by our government to move away from neutrality. And colleagues, I feel it's important to reference the creeping militarisation into EU politics. This debate has been a combination of maddening and depressing for the past 2 hours, listening to the vast majority of speakers. And I would remind people that at its core, the EU is supposed to be a peace project, and we should not move away from this. We owe any military purposes whatsoever. Garmagov.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Pedro for 1 minute.
Portugal leva à cimeira da NATO uma...
Portugal has a message for the NATO summit. We're willing to do our bit. For some time now, we have been on the sidelines, but this is changing now. We need an ambitious, coordinated plan between the Ministry of Defence and the armed forces in line with the strategic objectives of NATO. Such an investment will not only be a response to external threats, it will also be a conscious way of ensuring that we take responsibility for our own security, which is important to the economy too. We need to ensure that we have the right materials in place for defence. We need to move forward with our armed forces in order to attach due value to our military forces. We need to consolidate the role of those who do their duty for the country, and we need to ensure that they are valued. It's not that we want war, we want peace, but you can only have peace with strength. You can only have strength with investment, preparation and political will. After 7 decades of stability, now we can ensure that NATO can meet its objectives in future. You have a blue card from Mr. Oliveira. Can you accept that?
Obrigado, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Ms. Pedro, we're talking about the future of people. Death, destruction and war is what you want for the future of people. You're talking about investing in militarism, in arms. It's not going to avoid military conflict, it's not going to avoid war, it's going to have a catastrophic effect on people's lives. How dare you say to young people in Portugal that the only future is a future of worrying about war and going out to die for the sake of these militaristic plans? How dare you have that as a message to the people of Portugal? Perhaps you have a short memory. We, when we were in power, have always said we should invest in defence, which you would not do. And we see the strategic importance of being in security, which is clearly something to which you attach no importance.
Next speaker is Mr. Assis for 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidente. Senhora Alta Comissária, a história...
Thank you, President. High Representative. You can't learn everything from history, but there are a few useful lessons. Pacifists of the 1930s ended up supporting Nazism in the 1940s and Soviet totalitarianism in the 1950s and 60s. That's how it ended up. They didn't end up defending democracy. And NATO has played a vital role in recent times in defending the values and principles which we defend here, the same founding principles of the EU, the same founding principles of liberal democracies. that currently constitute this alliance of countries. It's a difficult time now, yes. There are tensions within NATO itself. The US is being erratic. The EU needs to step up to the plate for the sake of its own defence, and we need to step up our investment too. To me, it's not about particular numbers, 4%, 5% or whatever. We need to act in accordance with our needs and according to our own capabilities, but we need to ensure that other commitments, which are absolutely vital, are met with too. But one thing is sure, you cannot have national sovereignty, you cannot have European sovereignty if you cannot actually defend yourself against your enemy. We don't pick our enemies pick us. And we need to be ready for that.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Tonin for 1 minute.
Spoštovana komisarka, podpredsednik, drage kolegice in kolegi.
Vice President, Commissioner, colleagues. Well, we have exceptional capacities also in defence. I mean, together we are stronger. It's said that the weakest link determines the strength of the whole group. Well, NATO offers us collective strength, and collective defence can be stronger than the amount that every individual country can do. But every country needs to do its homework. Every country needs to do what it has to do to ensure the security of all partners. There's a NATO article that says an attack on one is an attack on all. So, as we've heard, an attack on Lithuania, for example, would be an attack on the United States. These terrorist attacks that we're currently seeing should be defended against. Thank you.
Belt for the half.
Thank you, voorzitter, commissaris.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. We are living in an increasingly chaotic and threatening world. The European Union and member states have choices to make. Either we step up and strengthen our defence and security, or we allow our democracy and freedom to be undermined. Anybody who minimises this danger is doing a clear disservice to European values, while at the same time strengthening anti-democratic forces within and outside our continent. However, we're not just talking here about more expenditure. We need to ensure that our expenditure on defence and strategic autonomy be smarter. It's important that we have a strong role for the private sector here. This is the best way of ensuring that enhanced defence spending strengthens our social state. Investment is essential to ensure that defence expenditure won't lead to increased prices billed by existing defence companies. Let's make the most of this opportunity to ensure that the European Union improves its position in terms of defence and security, strengthening our union rather than just throwing money after this.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Vistisen for 2 minutes.
We meet here today to discuss NATO and European security. But what is the value of those words if this chamber refused to name the real and rising threat to Europe? The greatest danger we face is mass migration and the following Islamization of our societies. And behind this external threat stands one radical force, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran is not just a Middle Eastern problem, it is a European problem. It has carried out assassinations and terrorist plots on European soil, it openly calls for war against the West, and it funds jihadist movements and sows division and violence in our streets. And now it's only a few weeks away from getting a nuclear bomb. And with its long-range missile program, it will have the means to hit the heartlands of Europe, Paris, Berlin, even Copenhagen. And yet, what is our response? Moral confusion, strategic blindness, and European leaders that line up not to confront Iran, but to condemn Israel. The one nation that defends our values and doesn't lack the courage that we should have had long ago. Let's be honest, Israel is doing our dirty work. They are striking at Iran's terrorist proxies. They are confronting a regime that we know all too well is a root cause of instability. And for this we repay them, not with applause, but with lectures and accusations. It is shameful and it is hypocritical. No European is safe as long as the Ayatollahs rule Tehran. There will be no peace, no stability, and no safety until the Iranian regime is overthrown and its nuclear missile program is demanded completely and for good. That must be our political objective. Not appeasement, not dialogue with tyrants, but actions guided by principles and the hard lessons of history.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Chiswo for 1 minute.
Panie Przewodniczący, Pani Komisarz.
President, Commissioner, NATO is the following principle. One for all for one. Article 5 is becoming, again, the very foundation of our security. The Hague summit must send a clear message. Europe will be ready and willing to defend any patch of land and any citizen, also in eastern Poland. We must not allow to have American troops withdraw from Poland. American presence is not only of symbolic value, it is also a deterrent. Today we must boost the European pillar of NATO. We must spend at least 5% of GDP on defense. Poland has already ordered 96 Apache helicopters. We spend over 5% on defense. We are carrying out a NATO investment program. Following the Hague summit, Europe must be more secure and 500 million people must feel safe. If you want peace, you must get ready for war.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Niinisto for 1 minute.
Mr. President, looking at the NATO summit from Finland that has over 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia, it is a no-brainer to support the 3.5% target on actual core military spending. NATO stands at a turning point, and we Greens support credible deterrence, but it must be strategic and accountable. And the EU has a vital role in this. The EU can make sure that the added spending is mainly focused on joint capabilities, that EU-NATO countries have the capability also to act alone without the support of the US. This is necessary to negate the threat of Russia. The EU can also make sure that much more is spent on European defence industry and on joint procurement. We need to mainly support Ukraine and stockpile our own reserves, and that means priority orders. And not to give grants to an already lucrative industry in sales to dubious third countries, and not to spend at the cost of spending cuts on the welfare of our citizens. We need to base the spending on defence on our European values, for those are the values that we want to protect.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mrs. Kalniete for 1 minute.
Colleagues, Europe has to understand that the imperialistic objectives of Russia reach further than Ukraine. The data of various intelligence services show that Russia is arming itself and preparing for confrontation with NATO. Therefore, all the allies have to pledge 5% of their GDP for defense. In the Hague summit, a decision has to be taken to reach this ambitious objective in the nearest future. My country, Latvia, proves that this is doable, provided there is a political will. In 2018, we were spending 2% for defense. This year it is already 3.6%, and next year we will invest 5%. There may be no postponing because we are all facing upcoming elections, because we need to invest in social programs, education, healthcare, and other priorities. But right now, the main objective of the political leaders is the modernization of the alliance, increased military and operational capabilities. There's no other alternative for lasting peace in Europe. Thank you.
And the next speaker is Mr. Della Valle for 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. NATO has turned into a war machine over the years rather than just a defence alliance. Europeans simply kowtow to the US position on defence, while at the same time supporting Netanyahu, a war criminal. The United States has led to a total loss of credibility. Von der Leyen tells us that the rearm plan has to be the first building stone of our strategic independence. In fact, the opposite is true. In other words, what we're doing is opening the way for the United States to force us to increase GDP spending to 5%. This is dictated by Washington. This is money which should be taken away from hospitals, education, our workers' pay so as to buy weapons. How can we simply point the finger at countries saying that they're a threat to our security, despite the fact over the years NATO and its allies have shed blood all over the world? The terrorist state of Israel, which has been committing genocide against the people of Palestine, we say nothing about that. We say nothing about what's happening in Libya, what's happening in Sudan, or the unjustifiable attack on Iran. The European Union should now putting its own citizens' interests in the forefront. We should change our focus. We should stop being the lackeys of countries which pursue terror and war. Thank you.
Now we are moving to the Catch the Eye. We have 7-8 interventions. I will start with Mr. Sousa, and it will be for 1 minute.
Senhor Presidente.
President, High Representative, a threat of invasion in Europe is no longer a hypothetical possibility. It's a tangible probability or realistic scenario. We face these threats from our borders, and the European Commission has been taking initiatives. We need to look at security action for Europe. EDIP, the European Defence Industry Programme, we've seen over 150 billion euro going into support for member states and defence industries so that we can move in the right direction towards European sovereignty in terms of producing defence and security materiel. And in that way, we'll be better prepared. This will create jobs, innovation, take us in the right direction in terms of giving a boost to national economies too, whilst also investing in NATO. I hope that at the NATO summit, EU member states will recommit to the alliance and, above all, show that the European pillar of NATO can stand up for itself to defend our own union and our Europe. Thank you.
Molto obrigado. Ahora es el turno para...
Thank you. Ms. Grappini.
Domnule președinte.
President, Madam High Representative, colleagues, the NATO summit that is about to start needs to start from the idea of peace and security, increasing the security for our citizens. We have been elected here, we represent the interests of the citizens, and if we were to ask the citizens what is most important for them, I guess the answer would be safety. Of course, we all need schools and education and hospitals, but if we don't have peace, we don't have the rest. Madam High Representative, that 150 billion in the SAFE project need to be given to the member states in order to produce, to have their own industry, not to import from third countries, because this way we create jobs and we solve the problem of income for our citizens. But I truly believe that we need to understand, we need to communicate to our citizens why we need a defense industry, because the danger is on at our borders. I live in a country where that borders the conflict, and yes, we need to think of Moldova as well, because we need to integrate it in order for our eastern flank to be safe. I guess we need solidarity as well. The EU needs to be very firm when it comes to the NATO summit. We can't leave all the citizens in the European space outside safety.
For 1 minute.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner Kallas, NATO is the most dangerous instrument available to US imperialism to maintain its hegemony and bellicose approach to global balance. The European pillar of NATO only reconfirms this militaristic approach, being complicit and subservient to US warmongering. NATO represents a project for destruction and death that runs counter to the interests of people, sacrifices resources that should be dedicated to improving people's living conditions. People want better living conditions, decent wages, education, health, housing. NATO and investing in militaristic aims and in weapons runs counter to all of that. As a whole, NATO accounts for a significant proportion of global military expenditure, allocating 5% of EU member states' GDP would just be investing in death rather than peace, rather than social progress, rather than the collective security of Europe, rather than the fundamental principles of the Helsinki Accords and the UN Charter.
There is Mr. Grasulis for 1 minute.
Hello, everyone. Europe must realize that NATO equals the United States. In the face of the war against Ukraine, which has been raging on for more than 3 years, we have to understand this, and the European Union must make conclusions. It must create its own army, its own defense industry, its own armaments. NATO today equals America, and it is defending its own interests, but Europe must defend its own interests. Is it not shameful that Europe is not defending Ukraine during all these years and Russia is making gains in Ukraine? What was the pretext? We will not defend Ukraine because it's not a member of NATO. Is Israel a member of NATO? Is Taiwan, member of NATO, and there NATO is defending them. And let's not forget the Budapest Treaty, according to which Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. Europe must have its own army and its own weapons.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Sipper for 1 minute.
Liebe Menschen Europas, manchmal wünschte ich...
People of Europe, sometimes it seems to me as though we are wishing to be totally alone. Quite honestly, a lot of people in the world are seeing us as though we're people who believe that we can defend ourselves alone without the USA, that we are the ones who are leading the USA's proxy war in Russia. And quite honestly, that what we are looking at is an absolutely shameless approach to this. Sometimes I wish that the tasks for our defence would be just shared out. And I think that the policy which so many are leading at the moment would not be so painful for all. I don't think that we should be having any rearmament anymore. But until we can sort things out properly, we need NATO.
Next speaker is Mr. Andrew Kattis for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. Happy birthday, Madam.
Благодаря на председателството, госпожо комисар. В навечерието на предстоящата среща на върха на НАТО, изграждането на нашата отбранителна способност е начело на дневния ред на Европейския съюз. Това е много важно при тези геополитически заплахи. Европейските държави членки трябва да покажат солидарност и с онези, които имат нужда от нея. Европейския съюз е стълб на НАТО и това е единствения начин да отстояваме своята сигурност. Докладът, с който се потвърждава нашата обща отговорност, изисква пълно
of non-EU in defense spending. In other words, the cost of not leveraging European economy of scale is estimated to range from 18 to 57 billion euros per year, as estimated European Parliamentary Research Service study. We need to think about necessity to spend also in social areas much more efficient.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Nicolaou for 1 minute.
Σύνοδος του ΝΑΤΟ.
NATO summit in The Hague, in the city where thousands and hundreds of thousands of people demonstrated, showing solidarity to the Palestinian people against the genocide by Israel, supported by NATO. The same thing as in Iran, which is pouring oil into the wars in the Middle East. And what does this summit want to do? Upscale the imperialistic war in the Ukraine, opening up new fronts for war. This is an unprecedented, full-on attack against people, and that's why we are looking at 5% of GDP. Now, this bartering on Ukraine is not following your obscure pretext, but because they want to get the 500 billion of reconstruction funds, the critical earth minimals. So against these decisions of the European Union, the governments and NATO, people are demonstrating on the street saying no involvement and no sacrifice for the slaughterhouses of NATO. They want better pensions, better education, better civil protection and better salaries. Thank you.
Thank you. The floor is now to Mr. Lopez Avila for 1 minute. Thank you very much, Chair. Representative Kaya Kallas, the upcoming summit on NATO has the aim of setting the strategic goals for the European Union with a strategic partner of the United States, which has doubtful aims. It should be doing it without following the Pentagon's guidance of raising the budgets to 5% for defense, not only because we need to be able to set our own budgets without prejudice, considering social issues, including housing issues, but also because this is not the best way forward. The best way forward is to specialize our forces, not to simply merge all of our budgets. A common budget with shared responsibilities, operative synergies, and of course, shared intelligence. That is the way forward that will allow the EU to play a significant defense role, not simply saying flat that all member states need to make budget sacrifices at the expense of their social fabric and other challenges such as housing. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Now it's the turn for High Representative and Vice President Kaya Kallas.
Thank you, honourable members, for this very intensive debate. I will just react on a few things. Of course, we need public support for these steps. We need to explain to our people why we have to do this and why we also need to make sacrifices. The problem with defence spending is when you need it, it's too late. You have to make these investments when you are in peacetime. And then it's actually much harder to explain to the people that why we need this. Of course, as politicians, we have so many places that we want to put the public money into. Education, social affairs, roads, you name it, infrastructure. There is so much. But if we don't have defense and if we have the threats also pointed out by our intelligence services, and we don't take those threats seriously, then all the investments that we do in any other field actually will become in vain. NATO is, and when we make defense investments, then it would also function as a deterrence, which means that hopefully the war is not coming to Europe. Now, NATO is a defense alliance, and I don't agree with those who are spreading the Russian narratives that, NATO enlargement is somehow threatening somebody. Why are these countries wanting to join NATO? Why did Finland and Sweden join now? Because of the threat coming from Russia. NATO is a defense alliance, and that's why it is the only thing that actually protects us, because together we are strong. Now, when it comes to NATO having the military plans and then EU having the plans for the defense industry, it is to complement these two institutions. It is to, like many of you said, not about the numbers, but actually the capabilities. What do we do with this money? And there I also echo what was said by many members here, is that we need joint projects, we need joint procurement. We need to do these things together because we need to also address the threats that we have together. Not, national security, but actually the security of us all together. So, there was also a question of, against whom these weapons are used that we are buying. I mean, it's like, you having a security system at home. You don't need it unless somebody breaks in. So this is exactly the same. You don't need those weapons unless somebody attacks you. And like I said in my speech, as Russia is spending so much more on military, they will want to use it. And against whom they want to use it? Well, there are, of course, many options, but we have to make sure that this is not against us, and it's also that it's stopping there. Then on the defense spending, we have a lot to learn from Ukraine, and I agree with those who said that it doesn't have to be only about enriching the defense industry. No, if we look at Ukraine, they have built the defense industry from zero, from scratch. So actually, bringing also the costs down, using much shorter procurement times, and we need to learn from there. Also, I want to address the issue of peace. Everybody in Europe wants peace. Europe is a peace project. We all agree on that. But we very clearly see right now the talks about the ceasefire that Russia doesn't want peace. And it takes at least 2 to want peace, but it only takes 1 to want war. And that is why we need to prepare. So we are living in dangerous times, and in order to have peace, you need to prepare for this. And I also want to address our Irish colleagues. I mean, yes, peace doesn't mean that the human suffering will stop. If, you surrender, you have the aggressor, and you say, okay, take all what you want, then it doesn't mean that the human suffering will stop. I mean, our experience behind the Iron Curtain after the Second World War, countries like Ireland get to build up their prosperity, but for us it meant, atrocities, mass deportations, suppressing your culture and language. This is what happens. It is also peace, but it's actually not freedom. It's not freedom of choice for people. And that is what the European Union is all about, and that is what we are also fighting for. Russia. Somebody said here that Russia has no reason to attack NATO. Well, Russia didn't have any reason to attack Ukraine either, or Syria, or Georgia, or the list is long. So they are not acting rationally, and we are democracies. We look through this democracy prism that it's not rational. They wouldn't do that. It's not rational to attack NATO. Well, we can't think because. We can't think how they think, and we need to prepare and learn from our past mistakes. And the past mistakes we have made in history. Many of you also mentioned this. I mean, there's not a lot and very far to see. And what I want to stress to all of those representatives coming from countries that are much further from Russia, look at the world map. Europe is a very small continent. Whatever happens in one part of Europe has an effect on us all. And we are only strong when we act together in NATO, when we act together in Europe. A stronger European Union is also a stronger NATO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Representative. Also, I take the opportunity to happy birthday as a European Parliament. And now the sitting is suspended until the votes, that it will be at 12. Thank you very much.